It's very strange when he saw the ship. The one being said, "If you were Christ, you would be a lot more afraid than you are now." And he took that as a compliment, like you're showing great strength, or something. You're very courageous. But that's not really how I took it. It's a very strange thing to say, that if you were Christ, you would be a lot more scared than you are now. What is that? Is it implying something? Are they evil? Or are they? What are they trying to say? I don't know.
In 1976, Rick A. Hale was 21 years old and unemployed. He had spent the previous 7 years, since he was a teen, in a small logging town in Washington, working as a road grader operator before he got laid off. He decided his best bet would be to return to his hometown of Seattle and move back in with his parents. This would let him look for work whilst saving his money. He was hoping to land with a logging company. After he finished moving all of his belongings back home, he figured he'd pack his car with some camping equipment and go into the woods. It was June 1976, and the weather was extraordinarily nice. He decided to do a little job hunting, and later in the day he'd do some camping and fishing. Just enjoy some of the summer. He spent so much of his still very young life working that he figured he could enjoy a couple of weeks in the forest. At the time of the encounter, I was in the area between the towns of Ellensburg and Cle-Aluminum, in a small spot called Indian John Hill, on a road just off Highway I-90. It was a dark, warm night, and I was heading towards a campground I knew about to get some sleep. I was thinking of eventually heading to Idaho, where one of my uncles lived, to try and get a job, but I never made it. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, let's back up a couple of days, because this, I feel, is very important. Once, while Hale was camped at Forks, Washington, near the Pacific Ocean, which was a very popular logging town at the time, he recalled sitting around his campfire thinking about the reality of extraterrestrials and if ESP was a possibility, how great it would be to travel to distant worlds. He began to wonder if he could actually entice a UFO to appear merely by thought. I realized this would sound kind of crazy to most people, but at the time it seemed quite logical to me. So that's when I started heading towards eastern Washington, because its terrain is wide open plains and desert with less people, compared to the west side of Washington, which has more rain and clouds and people. Hale pulled into Ellensburg, Washington at around dusk. I stopped and waited at a few spots near Ellensburg, but with no results. As it was starting to get dark, Hale headed for a campground he had known about previously. By now it's been dark for about an hour or two, and I turned off I-90 on the Tunum Creek exit. I came to a stop sign and a fork in the road. The road to the right went to Tunum Creek, where the campground was, and the road to the left had a sign that said Eagle Valley. Since I had never been down that road, I had a strong urge to explore it, so I turned left and started heading towards Eagle Valley. The road paralleled I-90 for about a mile. Then it headed over I-90 on an overpass with no exits. At that moment, I thought it was back on the Tunum Creek Road because it does look like the same thing. It goes over I-90 too, and looks very similar, especially at night. And at that moment, maybe 150 yards past the overpass, the road makes a wide turn to the right, then straight. As I was making the turn, my headlights shone onto three beings to my right. Hale claims that as he drove down that dark road, he encountered three strange figures standing to his right. They appeared to be about 6 feet tall, dressed in white suits with white helmets and dark-colored visors. The beings seemed to be about 10 to 20 yards away, walking slowly in a grassy field towards the road I was on. Now, you would think I'd be happy that I had made contact, but my reaction was quite the opposite. A strange numbing fear swept through my body from head to toe. Then I felt like I was going to panic. My next thought was to stop the car and turn it around and get the heck out of there, because I did not know where the road was going to end up at. And as far as I knew at the time, no one lived out there, and I did not see any traffic along the way either. The feeling of being alone with these beings was way too much for me to handle. I wanted to get back to civilization as soon as possible. Hale claims that the beings were moving so slowly that he actually thought he could turn the car around fast enough and drive past them before they could reach the road. He sensed that if he got too close to them, though, he'd probably have a panic attack. He just wasn't ready to see them up close. I stopped about a quarter of a mile less past the beings, and I had to jockey the car back and forth about 3 times in the middle of the road. Fearing the possibility of getting stuck in a ditch, I finally got the car turned around and started back towards the 3 beings. The quarter of a mile drive back was the longest drive of my life. At that point, Hale noticed a beam of white light, quote, like a large searchlight in fog, in the sky behind where he had observed the 3 beings. It's hard for me to tell how far away it was, but it seemed to be about 30 degrees above the horizon, maybe a mile away. Making a slow turn, I saw no other lights around it, and it seemed to be heading in my direction. I thought to myself, hurry up and get out of here. At first I thought I would not make it out, but before I knew it, I was back on the overpass, and I could see the headlights of the traffic below, which made me feel a lot better. Hale made his mind up that he would stay overnight in a motel, particularly one with a lot of business. For some reason, the thought of being around a large group of people made him feel safe. He headed back towards Ellensburg and checked in at the Holiday Inn, just off Freeway 190. It took him about 20 minutes. An odd thing happened while I was down in the lobby paying for my room. There was a band playing in the cocktail lounge, and when the band stopped, someone announced that this was the last call for drinks. So it must have been close to 2 a.m. I recall thinking it must have been about 12 or 12:30 a.m. I did not think much of it. I just lost an hour and a half somewhere, that's all. Everything written down here did happen, I swear to God. If the 3 beings were in fact people, humans pulling some kind of a gag, it sure fooled me. In fact, I can't find no reason for anyone to dress like that at that time of night. Or it was one heck of a hallucination. The days that followed after the contact left me feeling like I was on the verge of insanity, with a lot of good feelings like how important my discovery was, and the negative feelings of other people not believing me, especially my parents. In the year prior to his encounter, Hale acknowledged that he had developed a drug problem and had to spend much of March 1975 in a hospital, dealing with his issues. While in the throes of addiction, he had thought long and hard about ending it all. It was just a wonder I survived the ordeal, he noted. Afterwards, he began to wonder if his troubles in 1975 somehow factored into what happened that night. After the encounter, I got a job planting trees. I did that for about 9 months. Then I got a job selling vacuum cleaners. Then I got a job for U-Haul, a moving truck and trailer company. I worked up to assistant manager, then quit and went to work for Fortsagen Steel Company, where my dad and brother work. I started to work there in May of 1978 and have been working there ever since. I am a machinist operating large engine lathes and boring lathes, making shafting for our Navy and drill collars for oil drilling companies. I got married in 1980 to my wife Lorraine. She had 2 boys from a previous marriage and bore me a daughter who I named Thea. She is now 10 years old. I no longer take drugs and seldom drink. I still have a hard time trying to quit smoking tobacco. In 1988, there was a renewed interest in New Age ideas, the paranormal, and UFOs. During this time, Hale got Bob Gribble's number. He was a board member at the UFO CCI. The UFO group was actively encouraging witnesses to call and write them with their encounters. I finally was able to reach Bob and told him quickly what happened to me in 1976, and I asked him if he had records of any UFOs during that time frame and location. He said no, but he knew of some people who would be interested in hearing my story. He gave me the phone number of Eileen Edwards, who is the founder of UFO CCI, so I called her up and we started talking. During these calls, Edwards was able to assess whether or not Hale was a quack or a troublemaker. She ultimately found him to be quite intelligent and honest, and thought he might make a good candidate for a regression session. She asked him if he would like to come on board as a member of the UFO CCI. At the time, sure, I was interested in UFOs, but I never did much reading or research on the subject. But all that changed after meeting Eileen. Hale agreed and he began attending meetings and would occasionally speak to witnesses, though he soon became disillusioned by the whole thing. After a year or so, it all became too much for me and I dropped out of sight because it started interfering with my family life and my job. Another thing that contributed to his desire to walk away was he began to think more and more about the night in June 1976. The more he thought about it, the more stressed out he became. He thought about maybe sitting down and writing it all in book style. It would greatly relieve some of the pressure on my end of the stick, and get it all typed up, down to the last detail, not really in the hopes of making any money on it, but basically to relieve the burden of having to think too much about it. While under hypnosis, I became very emotional when Eileen took me back to the first meeting of the three beings. I would always break out crying. It's hard for me to tell you why, but it would just happen every time. That's one reason why I quit my hypnosis sessions, and the fact that it would leave me feeling very spaced out. Even my family was complaining about the way I acted when I would come home after a session. Hale claims that he would become consumed by thoughts of what he had observed while under hypnosis, and to keep from spacing out at home, he'd have to fight to keep his mind off the subject. When I turned my car around after seeing the three beings, I started down the road, then my car stalled and the three beings were standing just outside my door. I reached down inside myself somehow, found the courage to open the door and face my visitors as bravely as I could. Hale immediately sensed that these beings could read his thoughts, and he felt as though he was completely at their mercy. He recalled thinking that he would most likely not survive this encounter. The only thing I could think of saying, hoping to get the first word in to show them I was not scared, and to try and change their, what I thought, were deadly intentions was, I might be the reincarnation of Christ. There was a short silence, then one of them spoke in a godly, deep, calm male voice, "Okay, follow me." That little conversation calmed the tension in the air. So I followed the beings through a grassy field, up and over a ditch and barbed wire fence into the pine trees. Back when he was in his throes of addiction, Hale recalled once pondering the possibility that he might be a reincarnated soul, and he even considered the possibility that Jesus himself may very well have been reincarnated in his body. For some reason, this thought, this wild memory from his hazy drug days, came back to him, and for some reason, this seemed to ease, ever so slightly, the fear he felt. They continued across the dark field until they were out of sight of the road. It was then that Hale claims that he observed what looked like a small craft. Open at the top with sides about 3 feet tall and open in back, so you could walk into without stepping over the side, and a single large headlight in front, and it was whitish in color. As he stared at it, he heard a voice. The same voice spoke again. He said, "If you were Christ, you would be more afraid than you are now." I took that as a compliment to my courage and said nothing in return, trying to leave them guessing. Now you must understand my fear and state of mind. I did not want to get a good look at these beings, fearing the fact that they might not let me go if I did get a good look at them. Something I learned from watching TV, I'm sure. So during this whole experience, I tried to keep my eyes to myself and did only what they asked. I kind of turned into a big coward. Here was my big chance to greet beings from outer space, and all I could think of was my life. I remember walking onto the small craft and just stared at my feet. Then we were in the air, transporting me to a bigger craft nearby. This craft was in an open spot among the trees. The craft transporting me flew slowly over the larger craft below. The bigger craft reminded me of a giant grasshopper with its hind legs pulled off. Kind of an oblong triangular-shaped object that was dark olive green in color. The smaller craft landed about 50 feet in front of the larger one. I got out of the small craft and started walking towards the big one. I walked up a dark-colored ramp, which seemed very smooth like highly polished marble. Once inside, it seemed like I was alone. I remember seeing a large, round, translucent aqua blue table to my left. It was about 4 to 5 inches thick, maybe 4 feet off the ground, 5 feet across, with a single thick stern supporting the table in the middle, made out of the same material. The walls were a light-colored gray with white square panels in the ceiling for light. The entrance room seemed kind of circular in design, with a long, slightly curving hallway, with a row of windows being shielded by some kind of black visors. The windows were about 4 feet off the floor with the dimensions of 4 by 4 feet. One of the visors was open and I could look down into a larger room below where I saw 3 white, bald-headed beings dressed in white overcoats, standing around an empty table of some sort. These beings looked small, about 4 feet tall, kind of like the Greys. By the way, I was too far away to describe them in any better detail. Then I experienced some kind of block, because I remember being on a table, and I don't know how I got there. I saw a human male dressed in doctor's attire. He had short black hair with a Van Dyke-style beard. I am sure he told me his name was Carl. This room was almost pitch black with some kind of light behind me shining on me. The wall in front of me was illuminated and there was a hairy being standing there. Carl had moved behind me somewhere because I never saw him again. I stared at this hairy being because I could not make out any facial features. Apparently the being was looking up at the ceiling at something, because when it looked down at me and smiled, I guess it was a smile. You know how a dog looks when it opens its mouth and it looks like they are smiling? Well, that's what this being did. It had teeth of a wolf. Its claws were over an inch and looked very sharp and dangerous. He closed his mouth and removed the blanket that was covering me. I was completely naked. The wolf being was at the end of the table in front of me. It was not wearing any clothes that I could see. I could only see the wolf being from the waist up. I believe it was examining a skin condition, kind of a rash that I had developed when I was about 13 years old. The wolf being grabbed my knees and I became very scared of its claws. Then I heard that same voice say, "Don't be scared, we won't hurt you." That calmed me down and the wolf finished his examination of my body and left. Then again a voice told me it was okay to get up and get dressed. After this, Hale claims that he began conversing with some human-like beings. I was talking to some beings that seemed to be human. I felt I was talking to their leader. The room that this was taking place in looked very spacious compared to the other rooms I remember. Plus I recall seeing people walking by in the background, and everything seemed to have the color of gray to it. Now the man in charge asked me, "What would you want more than anything else in the world before you die?" This question kind of stunned me, because I felt this person may have the power to grant me my reply. Plus the thought of maybe he was going to do away with me also entered my mind. My mind started to race with thoughts like millions of dollars, wife and kids, live forever, become president of the USA. I looked up at the leader and said, "Peace on earth?" The leader gave me a little smile and said nothing in return. Then I turned around and noticed a set of large hangar-type doors in the back of a large, sunken, bay-like room that you could look down into from where we were standing. And I asked the leader if this was the way out of here. I don't recall any answer, but we did walk over to the sunken bay. I looked down into the bay and recall seeing these square-shaped pillars protruding from the side of the wall and coming up from the floor. Then someone said, "Would you be able to get down to the floor?" I said, "Sure," and started jumping down these pillars. I had to hop like when you cross a fast stream, trying not to get your feet wet. Anyway, I made it down without falling and proudly looked back up about 15 feet at the people above me. Then I looked back down and saw another examination table, and I was filled with dread again. Then I felt kind of cocky, like I could read their minds, and hopped onto the table and bravely laid there, waiting for their test to begin. I don't recall anyone coming by me, but I do remember a lot of bright white flashing lights, as bright as, for example, an arc welder would make. There was a loud humming sound, and I could feel a steady vibration through the table. I closed my eyes with fear. Then I remember opening them and seeing some geometrically shaped instruments, like some kind of probes against the bright white lights. I remember thinking maybe they started the engines up. Another thought I had was that of being a sacrificial lamb to save the people of the earth. Then what seemed like a minute or so, all the commotion stopped. I opened my eyes, glad to be alive, and I don't recall feeling any pain. I then sat up on the table, stepped onto the floor. Still, I don't see anyone around me. Then I noticed a stairway and started walking up it. Now, there seems to be this kind of fog drifting slowly through the bay room. I don't recall if it had any smell to it, but at the end of the stairs there was a man with, I think, blonde hair waiting for me. There was a low arm-like gate in front of us, so I opened it and walked forward. I stopped and turned around and noticed the man close the gate behind me and stayed on the other side. He said I was going for a ride. The next thing I remember, I was starting to faint. Then I remember I was rapidly flying through the air outside the craft, watching it slowly get smaller and smaller, thinking to myself, I won't forget. Then all of a sudden, I was in my car. It seemed late at night, and I remember lifting my head up off the steering wheel, remembering everything. Then I put my head back on the steering wheel and am falling asleep, forgetting everything. It's hard to explain, kind of like a dream within a dream. After the sessions, Hale recalled a detail that he had not remembered during the session. The memories flooded back one evening after putting his kids to bed. The part where I did not know how I got from the main entrance of the craft to the examination room with the wolf being. I remember standing near the entrance of the craft with the three beings. I was looking outside and down the ramp when one of the beings said something wonderful to me. But I am sorry that I can't recall what it was he said. But I do remember that it made me feel very important and good inside. Then I entered a doorway that was a few feet from the entrance on the left side, and the beings closed the door behind me and did not follow me in. I remember becoming very mad, and I felt betrayed, like for the first time, feeling of truly being kidnapped. The room was dark with maybe some small dim light in it. The room was cold and musty smelling. There was a small round porthole that I tried looking out of, but I would slide down because the wall on that side was curved and not straight up and down like the wall I entered from was. So then I started looking around and I noticed I was not alone, because a small skinny young girl, maybe in her teens in age, was stooped on her knees behind some boxes with an odd blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She had long dark straight hair that fell to the middle of her back. Her face and arms looked dirty, like she had been living in this room for a long time. Her face looked pretty to me. She did not seem scared of me and seemed to welcome my company. Then I felt a strange love for the girl. Hale got an overwhelming sense that this girl wanted to make love to him as quickly as possible, though Hale declined. I remember that my mind started to wander, and then I became confused with the situation I was in. The next thing I remember is a hatchway door opening right next to us. There was a short hallway with a small room at its end. The girl said, "There's a doctor waiting for me to give me an examination." So I left the girl and walked towards the examination table. Things are kind of blocked out as far as what happened next. And that's all I recalled last night. I would like to note it's kind of strange going from one room to the next. Things get blocked out of my memory, like each room is a piece of a puzzle. After his hypnotic regression, Hale began to ponder the experience, what he remembered under hypnosis. Having been on the other side working as an investigator for a year, he found that he was less likely to accept everything at face value, and wondered if some aspects of his regression were actual memories or parts of dreams that had mixed together. He specifically believes the aspect involving the girl might very well have been a dream that had somehow gotten entangled with his actual memories. I would have no idea where these thoughts came from. Just the fact I would be having experienced this encounter somewhere, sometime, somehow, and the person doing the investigation would say the beings were collecting sperm from me for some kind of genetic cloning experiment. And I would have probably believed them, because that's the first thought that crossed my mind when I first remembered this section. Don't get me wrong, I am not trying to throw a wet blanket on the fire. There are still parts of my experience where I am not sure if they are dreams or not. Plus, I am not an expert on hypnosis to ridicule it or not. I am just trying to tell you the facts as they happen to me. To me, the hypnosis is like a floodgate opening up a lake of forgotten memories pouring forth. Not all at once, mind you, but over a period of 6 months or so. It was like I was still in a trance after I was brought out of hypnosis, and remembering things that had happened even when I was at home. I remember dreams which I remember waking up in a bed, and I remember things which are familiar, that really happened, but I can't remember if they were dreams or not. That really bothers me. Where did these memories come from? I know they are real. I did not make them up under hypnosis. I guess that's the million-dollar question most of us have.
I liked how this wasn't a perfect witness. He admitted, I had this substance abuse problem in the past. When I was in the throes of this addiction, I had some crazy thoughts. And anyways, he admitted that he was, dealing with some kind of issue. And when he encountered these beings, the first thing he thought of I was the reincarnation of Christ, which is very strange. It was almost involuntary. And I've talked about that in previous videos, where when people encounter beings, sometimes they say stuff that they don't know why they say it, or why they think that. It's almost like there's something interfering with their thought process. He started having a problem telling what was real and what was a dream. And to him, it all seemed real. And it was all kind of overlapping and getting entangled. And he was having issues with, even when he was out of the hypnosis session, he was struggling with this. And he came to question, how much of the abduction that he recalled was real.